Wow. Okay. So, how about if we get started, and I will introduce folks in the order in which they are on my screen. So, on my upper left, we have Representative Frank Ryan. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Vicki and Sil Schubert on the bottom left on mine. And then over on my right, we have Kirk Bloodsworth. You have to wave to the nice people, Kirk.
The one and only.
So what I thought I would do is
That's right.
invite you each to tell us a little bit about how you came to the position that you have on capital punishment. And then I want to also talk about how your Christian faith helped you to come to that position. So I'll tell you what, Kirk, arbitrarily, let's start with you. And I wanted to save Representative Ryan for last because I think he's going to bring it all together for us in terms of where do we go from here. Okay.
It's like the death penalty, arbitrary.
There you go.
Yay! Yay!
In 1984, I was an honorable discharged Marine. I hadn't been arrested for nothing in my life. I was just newly married. I was about 23 years old, a couple months before my 24th birthday. I met a woman out in Baltimore County, Maryland, and fell in love, all that stuff. You can see my entire story by reading my book, Bloodsworth, The True Story of the First Death Row Inmate Exonerated by DNA Testing, written by Tim Junkin, or you can see the documentary by the same title, Innocent Man by Gregory Bain. But in that summer, it was hot, just like it is today. I remember it, as long as I live, I got arrested that morning in one of those big bright red suns in the morning, I should have knew from my waterman's heritage something about ready to happen to me. There was a little girl by the name of Dawn Hamilton that was found brutally raped and murdered in a wooded area near her home on that summer in July. It'd be July 25th, some 37 years ago.
Wow.
That she was found brutally murdered. A search ensued for her killer, and the description of this person is as follows. And I wish I had one of the big views so we could size it up, but I'll give you a mental description. This description of this person was as follows: 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. Now, in 1984, my hair was about as red as a fire truck. I had sideburns down to here, red mustache. It's been a long time since it was red, but it was red back in those days. And I'm about 6 foot tall, 200 something pounds. Now, the description of the real killer was 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. That don't represent me one way or another, because even back in those days, as you can probably see from my complexion, I don't get tan, and I'm certainly not skinny. Dawn Hamilton was out playing hide and go seek with her friends that day and come across one of the most evil men that I would ever think of. It's in any worst parent's nightmare, anybody, uncle, whoever. You lose your niece or your daughter or something to a brutal killer. Now, search ensued for this guy. Next door neighbor called the police and said, on a police tip line, said, the composite sketch you're all circling around looks like my neighbor Kurt. I just moved to Baltimore. I hadn't been to Baltimore less than a month. I come there for 4th of July weekend. And we ended up leaving right around the same time, a couple weeks after her murder, was on August 4th. And then I was arrested for Dawn Hamilton's murder on August 9th, 1984. To a shock and amazement to me, all because somebody went and pointed a finger. Now, there was so many suspects in this case, so many different people. There was 500 tips on this tip line, and they had several suspects that they were interested in. And right around that time, this fellow by the name of Kimberly Ruffner was accused of attempted murder and rape of a woman 3 weeks after me in Fells Point. He had got arrested, got 45 years, went to trial, and the whole time, you never think nothing of it, you know. And fast forward, because I know we got a lot of people to talk here tonight. I don't want to take up anybody's time, but he, you know, that police report about him came in 8 days before I was arrested. Nobody went back to check. I wound up going through a 2-week trial where people who I had never seen before pointed a finger at me saying I'm the man they saw. And none of it was true. Fast forward, after reading a book by Joseph Wambaugh about called the Blooding, for the first time DNA was ever used in a criminal case. I had the eureka moment to get it tested. Now, I wrote the prosecutor in my case. I said, look, I want this new DNA test proved that I'm an innocent person. She wrote me back. This is what she said. Dear Mr. Bloodsworth, we regret to inform you that the DNA in Dawn's case has been inadvertently destroyed.
Oh.
I didn't think I'd have a snowball chance then, you know, at that point. That was my last appeal. My trial, second trial, round up the conviction again. I have no chance. And my lawyer, who's the chief judge in Washington, D.C. now, his name is Bob Moore. And I had called him every single day of his life, I think, from the time he was my lawyer till the time he wasn't. And he would answer the phone every time. So I said, look, go look for that evidence. Sure enough, it wasn't where it was supposed to be. He was coming back to the jail to tell me I was going to wind up staying there the rest of my life because the state we give the death penalty back. So easy to execute an innocent man, though, woman for that matter. And right before he's getting ready to leave, he met the court clerk in the hallway. He said, what are you doing here? They knew each other. So I'm looking for that evidence in the Dawn Hamilton case for Kirk Bloodsworth. He said, well, I know where that's at. It was wound up in the judge's closet, the paper bag, sitting in the floor. Sitting in the floor. Now, fast forward again. You know, about 3 weeks, it was like 10 years later, I got a pardon from the governor. I got exonerated. Had all this good luck. I got $300,000 from the state, which is peanuts. And I was sitting in my house, and I happened to be watching this movie. And I don't know what made me think about it, but I thought about when God told Cain, that he had slain his brother. He said, his blood cries out from the ground. I had got so tired and, waiting, and I just knew God was going to help me. I just knew it. I felt his presence every day of my existence, to this day. And, I'm not worthy to touch the sand, but I screamed out in my, feeling about the Dawn's case, and I said, Dawn Hamilton's blood's crying from the ground. 3 weeks to the day, that I said that prayer, they call it the real killer, Don Hamilton. He was right in prison with me for 5 years and never said a word. And he wasn't 6'5" neither. He was 5'6" and 160 pounds. That police report came in was him 8 days before I was arrested. I never went back and checked it out. Support the death penalty? Not in my lifetime. We've had it long enough. We've had it for 500 years, and it ain't shown us one tinker's damn worth of anything but misery. It hasn't promised us a lot. It'll stop the other killers from killing. No, it ain't. There's over 168 people that I know of. I'm the executive director of this group right here called Witness to Innocence. And it's a nonprofit organization that is vying for death row exonerees and their family members. We empower exonerees to do the talking that I'm doing right now to become better leaders in this movement to abolish the death penalty. If I got anything to say about it, and the rest of these folks that's talking tonight, I can guarantee you, we want to, because if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody in America. It shouldn't happen to anybody, state of Pennsylvania or otherwise. That's my story, y'all.
Wow.
Thank you. Wow.
That's the truncated version, but
Very good.
Thank you, Kirk. We're going to come back to you in a little bit because I really want to hear about your conversion, which is such a huge and powerful story.
yeah.
So, Phil and Vicki, maybe you can talk about how you came to the position that you hold through your own experiences.
Phil and I kind of worked out together on this a little bit, and he has that part, and I'll do the follow-up. Is that okay with you? You have your permission? Thank you. Thank you.
Our daughter Shannon was murdered on May the 7th, 1998 in Philadelphia. She was in graduate school there at the Wharton School, working on a PhD in finance. She was 2 days from being done with final exams. It was a Thursday morning, a couple days before Mother's Day, 3 days, I guess, before Mother's Day. She was planning on coming home, and we were going to have a traditional Mother's Day morning brunch. And a serial rapist, someone broke into her apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning. She was getting ready to take a bath. She screamed for help. The next door neighbors called police. Within 7 minutes, the police were standing outside her apartment door, and they got into a discussion with the neighbors over where the scream had come from, and knocked on her door, and nobody answered. And they said, well, there's nobody here, so it must have come from outside. And they argued back and forth for a minute, and finally they turned to the guy that had called 911 and said, if we broke this door down, there's nothing going on, won't you be terribly embarrassed? And he said, well, yes, I'd be embarrassed, but I'd be relieved. And so they said, well, since you're not sure, we're leaving. So within 5 minutes of arriving there, they left. Ultimately, the police took the case to the profilers at Quantico, the FBI profilers, who looked at the case, and they decided that when the assailant went into her apartment, he had no intention of killing her, but with the police standing outside her door, pounding on the door, he strangled her to keep her from crying out, because if she cried out, the police would have broken in and captured him. As the investigation into her murder played out, they came to discover that there were 4 cases within 2 or 3 blocks of her apartment where the young woman, similar with her background and situation, MO, had been attacked in the prior 9 or 10 months. It took them 9 months to identify the first two by DNA linkage. The second two were not identified for another 10 months. And they were not identified by the police. They were identified by reporters at the Philadelphia Inquirer. The Philadelphia Inquirer got extremely interested in. First of all, they thought that the lab must have been really screwed up, because it took them 9 months to do a DNA linkage in 2 rapes within 3 or 4 blocks of Shannon's apartment with exactly the same MO. It took 9 months to do a DNA match. As they started digging into what was going on in the lab, they discovered that there were other cases, at least 2 other cases, that had been reported as sexual assaults, rapes, or attempted rape. Well, the first one was an attempted rape. That the police had been reported to the police, and they had DNA evidence, but they classified them as non-crimes. The police at the time had in Philadelphia had a policy that they would not announce to the community there was a serial attacker in the community until they had 3 linked crimes. They actually had 4, but 2 of them were classified as non-crimes. They only had 2. Shannon was followed home from a movie 2 nights before she was attacked and killed. She walked around a square a couple of blocks from her apartment. There were a couple of apartment doormen saw what was going on, went out and watched that. She made a mad dash for her apartment. She thought she'd gotten rid of it. By the time she got to her door, he was standing at the end of the block staring there at her. She told one of her friends about this. The police ultimately knew about it. But anyway, she thought it was some guy trying to pick her up. She didn't know there was a serial rapist. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, he breaks in. He catches her unaware. She screams. The neighbor calls. The police come. They don't. The cops, the street cops, the patrol officers don't know what's going on either, because the sex crimes unit had not reported that there was a serial rapist in the community. And they broke in and they killed her. So it, partly our story happened fairly quickly. This was a Thursday morning. On Saturday evening, Vicki and I were in church. We went to Mass. We'd always been quite close with especially our assistant pastor, and Shannon had been quite close with him as well. And so we were at Mass on Saturday evening, and the assistant pastor actually said the Mass that night. He asked people at the beginning, he told them what happened, asked them to pray for us. And things were going as fine as they can go when you're in that kind of situation. At least for me, until we got to the Lord's Prayer. And when we got to the Lord's Prayer, I grew up in a Catholic family in Northwest Missouri, a rural community, rural family. We said the Rosary every night, so I had said the Lord's Prayer thousands of times over my life, but it never quite focused on the phrase, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And when I got to it that night, I couldn't say it out loud. And I thought about that phrase in a way that I had never, ever thought about it before. And at that juncture realized, probably in a way I had never had before, what Christianity was all about. So we decided fairly quickly that we had some problems we needed to solve. We needed to try and figure out who had murdered Shannon, and it took them 4 years to find him. By the time they captured him, he was attacking women out in Fort Collins, Colorado. When they captured him on April the 23rd in 2002, he had attacked 6 women in Philadelphia and 8 women in Fort Collins, Colorado. He had only murdered one of those 2014, and that was our daughter Shannon. She was the only case where the police were called to the scene during the point of the crime. When they caught him, the prosecuting attorney, we were very clearly on record by then that we would oppose the death penalty because of what we believe, and so they caught him, and the DA came out and said that they were going to pursue the death penalty anyway, and so we opposed that quite directly, and you know, our story was that we ultimately prevailed, and I think we were much better for it. In the typical, if he had been convicted of Shannon's murder and sentenced to death, he would still be sitting on death row in Pennsylvania. We would still be going through periodic hearings on going through all of the details of the case. They caught him on the 23rd day of April in 2002, and because we convinced the DA in Philadelphia that they should pursue life in prison without parole rather than the death penalty, he was willing to plead guilty if that was the sentence. On the 30th day of May, 5 weeks later, he was sentenced for Shannon's murder, and we could go on with our lives.
Wow.
Oh,
Representative Ryan.
can I go?
I'm sorry?
I was going to say, Vicki, do you want to go first?
Yes, I want to follow up. It's segue into my part.
Perfect, thank you.
I think one of the many gifts that we have from some of this was that we had this strong base and faith and support in the family, huge families. He's number 5 out of 8 children, so am I. And we really had tremendous things, and we so really got involved. We had learned a lot in our vast years of education that, you know, if you hold on to that anger, if you just want to, you know, hold on and just make sure you made justice happen, it isn't going to help in that way. I have a quote here that I had used in an organization. I immediately got involved in working with murder victims' families. My background had been in social work and social justice in all years of my education. So I had this little quote that we had used, and it was very, very hard, that by the time Shannon's murder was captured, we had learned that pursuing the death penalty would not be the way we could want to honor our daughter's life, nor would that decision have helped us deal with the painful reminders of all her unfulfilled hopes and dreams. Facing the reality of the death penalty made us realize that the sacredness of life was not an abstract concept. Ultimately, we concluded that if we couldn't stand by our principles when it was excruciatingly difficult, then they were not our principles at all. And we took that stand, and boy, we took a whole lot of backlash to it. And the district attorney and many of the other people said, "What, didn't you love your daughter?" It was very, very difficult. But I'll tell you, the groundwork was the background of our faith and our education and the tremendous family support. And so I got involved with an organization. In fact, I was a co-founder of Murder Victims Families for Human Rights. We started working with them, and I had that great opportunity of bringing together a lot of the murder victims' families that were still holding on to that anger, that were still, you know, just their lives were destroyed. I had learned in the process that anger and vengeance can lead to high rates of divorce, high rates of unemployment, very poor health conditions over time, and that they needed a whole support system of people who understand what it's like. And what better person could understand it than my husband and I and other people who work with these families. And so we got very involved in that. Plus, I'm very involved in working hard to get the death penalty removed in the United States. And I'm very, very proud to say that the state of Maryland, where she was born, passed the death penalty, repealed it, and that's been a lot of years that Sil and I had worked on. She died in 1998. And in fact, there were only 9 states at the time she died, and just recently, the 21st state in the United States got rid of the death penalty. And we've had the honor and support of getting to work in many of those states, very active in the repeal of the death penalty. And hopefully, maybe in Pennsylvania too sometime. So anything else you'd like me to cover? Or?
Well, we're going to come back to you. So
Okay, very
thank you
happy.
so much for your story. I really appreciate that. So we have voices from people who have been through various parts of the process personally. And I would like to turn to you, Representative Ryan. If you could talk about how you came to the position that you hold about the death penalty, and then share your vision of how do we get there from here. And then I also want to circle back and ask you guys about how your faith brought you to where you are, because I know that's been a big part for all of you.
First of all, again, for Vicki and Sil, my heart goes out to you. Vicki, when you and I talked on the phone, when this issue first came up, I was touched by it. We share the Mount St. Mary's connection as well. So it's quite a nice group. And Kirk, as a fellow Marine, again, God bless you for your service and not losing hope in the process. My story is not compelling at all. Mine is just a perspective. I'm from downtown Baltimore. My dad died when I was very young. I was 3 years old. My mom was a single mom with 5 kids. My sister was 6 months old when my dad died. Our dad died. And so I saw the tremendous poverty that we lived in. And at the same time, my mom ended up becoming a fairly huge success. She was always successful in my mind, but she became a financial success as well. She became the director of development for the Daughters of Charity in Emmitsburg, and that's what got me to Mount St. Mary's. But what happened was I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I was studying to be a priest. I wanted to be a priest. And then I ended up in the Marine Corps instead, which is an unusual transition. Although for people who know the Marine Corps, we're actually a fairly heavy Catholic-based organization.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
we know.
A lot of people are not aware of that, but we are. I like to tell everybody that we are God's chosen branch of service, but my other branches of service ask me not to do that too often. But what happened was I spent a whole career in the Marine Corps Reserve. I'm also CPA, and I have never supported the concept of the death penalty. And so then I got back from Afghanistan, and I saw I got called active duty after September 11th and went to Afghanistan. Came back and retired after 30 years commissioned service in the Marine Corps. I'd been a prior enlisted Marine. And I decided to run for Congress. And I said at the time, by the way, in the conservative area, I said, you need to be aware, one thing that I have as a strike against me that might be a problem for you is that I'm opposed to the death penalty. And there were 7 of us running in that race, and I was the only one opposed to the death penalty. I came in 4th or 5th in the 7-way race. There was a guy by the name of Paterno who apparently had a little bit better name recognition than I did. That was intended as a joke if you're from Pennsylvania.
We know.
A lot better name recognition than I did. But Scott Paterno ran, and he did a really nice job, and we've since become very good friends. Fast forward, I got called out of retirement, went to Iraq, did a tour of duty in Iraq, came back, and finished my Marine Corps career, and decided to run for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. And when I did, I've always been right to life, but I was asked about 2.5 years ago, to vote on mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. And I don't know much about the criminal justice system at all. So I decided, I told somebody the other day I could pass a $35 billion budget and understand everything that's in it in 30 minutes. But I did probably 200 hours worth of research on mandatory minimums. So I called the judge, I called the District Attorneys Association, I met with the Public Defender's Office, and I'm having all these meetings, and I talked to the judges, and they were opposed to it. I talked to the Public Defender's Office, they were opposed to it. I talked to the DA's Association, and they were very much in favor of it. And so one of the public defenders said to me, he said, Frank, I need to ask you to ask the District Attorneys Association this question. They said, how do you Would you ever use the mandatory minimums as a way of pressuring someone to plead guilty? And the head of the district attorneys association was crystal clear. He said, absolutely, that's why we want it. So I said, let me make sure I understand this. Someone out of fear of going to prison for 5 years might plead to something they didn't do because they don't want to go to the state house, they want to go to county prison. And he says, well, we're hoping that's not what happens. And I said, okay, got it. So I was one of about 6 Republicans who voted against it. And so then Senator John Rafferty, who's a Republican senator at the time, called me up and said, could I talk to you about this? And I said, of course. And I got a call from the American Conservative Union who said, we were surprised by your vote against mandatory minimums. So I said, well, look, here's my perspective. If you are poor and you don't want to go away for 5 years, you might plead guilty to something because you can't afford to defend yourself. And I was fairly convinced that public defenders' offices were not well financed. So it appeared to me to be a potential injustice to people who were poor. And I've been in that boat. And I often think about, Kirk, the difference that happened between you and me is that you were in the wrong place at the wrong time and I wasn't. And that, you know, it had such a negative effect on your life. And with the grace of God, it had a good ending, but you were still significantly hurt by this. So I went and started talking to our pastor, and I said, I just want to ask you, is this going to be a problem for you, your take on this? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'm very much vehemently opposed to the death penalty. And Vicki, that's when they put you and me together. And they said, well, you really need to do this. And I started working on my own death penalty repeal bill. And that's when Chris Rabb approached me and said that he was doing one as well. And the advantage of Chris is that I'm considered to be one of the more conservative members of the House of Representatives, and he's considered to be one of the most liberal. And by joining forces, we thought it would have a bigger impact on people, and it did. And then, so I'll kind of segue from that and just make one comment. I mentioned this to Kathleen at the time. I believe we can get the death penalty repealed in Pennsylvania. But we have to be very careful. And I'll tell you what the carefulness has to be. There are victims' families who don't feel quite the way Kathleen and Syl do. And there are some evil people in the world. And so I had the chairperson of the Judiciary Committee say, Frank, I'm in favor of the death penalty, but I'm willing to have a hearing for you. When all of a sudden the synagogue massacre at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh happened. And he came back and he says, I can't do it. Because at the same time that was going on, there was a group of people that said compassionate release for people who were on life without parole. And he said, I still support having a hearing, but if I give somebody life without parole and then we start doing compassionate relief, then there's no such thing as life without parole. And he said, I can't do both. He said, I do believe the death penalty is wrong, but I do believe that there are some people that should be locked up the rest of their life. To which I responded and said, the problem I have is people could get life without parole and be wrongfully accused. The only difference between these two issues is you, in a death penalty case, you're going to get appeals paid for by the state. In a life without parole, they lock the person up and they throw away the key. It doesn't mean an injustice hasn't still been done.
Right.
So I believe that the ultimate basis behind this is also leading to the effort of saying, I would like state funding for public defenders so that we make sure that if someone is guilty, that they are getting the appropriate sentence. But that if they're innocent, that they are not found guilty because they're poor.
Right.
So that's my reason behind the whole thing. You guys have much more compelling reasons than I do.
I don't know, but it's interesting. I'm intrigued by, what I know about successful repeal campaigns, and it seems that there's always a Republican who's leading the way, and it shows that it's really not a partisan issue. So if we can get past, this is what my party believes, this is what the other person's party believes, it seems like we would be in a much better position to get there from here. And I know Sil and Vicky and Kirk, you have all been part of the successful campaigns to abolish. In fact, I have a picture of the three of you in the balcony in Maryland that I believe Steve Dare took. And it's, everybody's got hands up. It was great.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, could you talk about the experiences that you had in those states and how your faith played a part in that? Because I understand that that was a very big thing that was able to reach people.
For my involvement, I remember I just got out in '93, so the death penalty, I didn't really have a come to Jesus moment about it like somebody has. I knew instinctively whether I was physically, mentally thought that the death, like, oh, kill him, it's that kind of thing. I also knew that there's only, it says right in the Bible in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. I don't think it's, we can't cherry pick. And so I decided a long time ago, and the fact that, so many people have been found innocent on death row, they just let guy out in Pennsylvania, Mr. Ogrod, he's innocent his days long. And, and he'd been in there for 30 some years, and oh my God, it's, so I got together with, that's when I met Vicky, and Vicky and I knew each other for many years. We've known each other. We've sat on committees together. We've, walked the halls of Annapolis. And actually, that was the quickest, the longest one was the state we were at. It took us 20 years to get that done. But, and then right after that was over, I went to Delaware. And then I've been in every state, Connecticut, New Hampshire. We vented it in every single state that we have been in. And, and Mr. Ryan, that's always faithful, right? Always faithful. And so I couldn't allow it to happen. I mean, picture it now. I'm in the Maryland Penitentiary, and I'm in the hospital wing of that institution. Right above me was the gas chamber.
Ooh.
And I mean, literally right above my cell. That's where it was. And I slept underneath of it for, long time. John Thanos was on that floor. He was the person who was executed in the state of Maryland. Now, I just had this feeling from early days. And so I took the catechism and became Catholic in prison. That was the only place that I found any kind of refuge, was in that place. It was, it was something about it. And I wound up taking the catechism with Al Rhodes, who just passed away about a year or so ago. And he was a priest, and he sat right in my cell. They'd lock him in my cell. We would talk about all this stuff. And I just felt like, we don't have a right to take somebody's life. We have a right to our opinion, maybe, but we don't have a right to take somebody's life. That's God's right. As soon as we got kicked out of Eden, the wages of sin is death, the book said. And so we can't, that's God's bet on us. We're all going to face that thing. And I couldn't very well, and I've seen Cameron Todd Willingham leave this earth. I've seen George Davis leave this earth, and all these other people that I believe should never have been executed. And we just had another one. They're doing executions at the federal level right now.
Yes, darn it.
And without a warrant. The warrant would expire, so he went and killed him anyway. And it's and the last thing what the man said was it was innocent man. Now I don't know about anybody else, and honestly, anybody kill a 9-year-old little girl, I don't want them to see the light of day again. Not a chance. And they forfeited their right, I think, when somebody takes a person's life, to be able to come out here anyway. But that's as far as the punishment should go. It doesn't give promise to most people don't realize it. 20 years of your life to be out of society and not even have a job and getting 3 meals a day, which let me tell you, it's maybe in McDonald's trash can, it might be worth something to eat in this place. This is a rough life, and I just couldn't stand the thought, because, I had that feeling myself when they caught the real killer. I was facing the devil in my mind, and this is what I thought about. Why should we, if we are living with Shannon's murder, or if the people, all of us, are living with Dawn Hamilton's murder, we have to live with what these people do. And that's a day-to-day war to have to deal with, a battle within yourself of losing these people and the grief that entails. And then turn around and kill somebody else. It perpetuates a circle that never stops moving. And, I think the best part of valor is to not execute a person and let them live with what they've done. Live as long as they can for what they've done. They got a chance to repent. But we just ice them and they don't have nothing. And in the meantime, while we're doing it, we're going to kill an innocent person. We have killed an innocent person. I know for a fact we have, as soon as I sit here, because it's too arbitrary of a sentence. And people of color and everybody else are getting slammed. I just think, and that's a long-winded detail, but the death penalty has to go.
Kathleen,
Yes.
Miss Vicki, you were talking a little bit about some of the foundations, some of the religious background and everything,
Thank you.
and Frank was bringing this to mind again too. It really made huge difference, and I thank God every day for the gift that he helped me have and brought me to this, because I think that was the foundation. I was growing up and I wasn't sure what to do, and I got an opportunity to go to a convent boarding school when I was in high school. And it was run by a group of Benedictine nuns, and I moved away from my home. I was a couple hours away from home, and wonderful education, wonderful people, really based in faith. And it was just an enormous education. Far and beyond all the great academic stuff was this great foundation in my Catholic faith. And at the end of my senior year, I kind of struggled. I didn't know what God was calling me to do. And I decided to enter the religious life. And I stayed there probably almost up to my final vows, about 5 years. I was getting a lot of education there, teaching in different formats. And I came up about the time the sisters came to me and says, it's time, Vicki, for you to make your final vows. And we have a policy here that the nuns can, you can say, no, you've changed your mind, you don't want to do it. And the nuns can say to you, we don't think you should continue in this life. And the outcome was that I told them I had been praying a very, very long time. And I really thought that God was calling me to something different. I didn't know exactly what it was yet, but I thought he was. But I had that great foundation. And within about, about years after, maybe a year or two after that, because we were in graduate school, I met my
It
husband.
was 3 or 4. But
3 or 4. Thank you. He's got better numbers for that data than I have.
time flies when you're
And it's been a fun 49 years. Thank you. But, you know, I couldn't understand what was the purpose of this. I kept saying to God, what is it that you're calling me to do here? I mean, I really want to serve you. And I had a couple children, and I was teaching. I was primarily a teacher, and kept getting a lot of education, graduate degrees and everything. And then this horrible call came in that you had to come to Philadelphia and identify a dead body. And it was then, as the process evolved, that I thank God every single day I wake up for that gift of saying there was a purpose. There was a purpose of this. And all that background and training had helped me to educate and everything. But then I realized what it was, not only to have this wonderful husband and family, but that I had this connection with the life of social justice. And then all of a sudden, I lose my daughter. And I knew nothing about the death penalty then, nothing about this whole system. And that has shaped the whole rest of it.
I would come at this just a little bit differently. If you think about the horrific cases you hear about, even the case that Kirk was convicted for, you know, these are horrendous cases. People hear about them on the news, read about them in the paper. And they know that somebody really bad did something to a person that didn't deserve it for it to happen. For most people, this is really kind of an abstract thing. You know, a really bad dude did something to somebody that didn't deserve it. And usually that person that didn't deserve it ends up dead. And so this guy, typically it's a guy, doesn't deserve to live. Very abstract. You kind of read about it, you hear about it, make a quick judgment, and you go on about your business. We profess to be Christians, Jewish, even Muslim. You read the Quran. There's a higher order than eye for an eye. And they don't have to face things in the way that Kirk did. He faced it on the other side than we did. But we're talking about taking a person's life. And, you know, I mentioned I choked within a couple of days on the Lord's Prayer. I've been through the Gospels many times. The one that really kind of captured my attention more over time, you know, if you believe in, if you respect life, if you say you're a Christian and you're living according to the teachings of Christ, Christ actually taught us very, very directly about the death penalty. He came upon an execution that was about to take place. He did not argue about the evidence. He didn't argue about the law. He didn't argue about whether or not this woman had done anything right or wrong. He turned to the people that were going to kill her and said, you know, you without sin throw the first stone. Now, if we believe this, if this, you know, Vicki mentioned this principle thing. We were out in Colorado shortly after the guy that killed Shannon was sentenced for her murder, life in prison without parole. And there was a reporter out there. He was merciless. He kept pestering and pestering and pestering. You know, how could you do this? This was your daughter. Didn't you love your daughter? You know, how, oh my God, how could you do this? And finally, you know, he backed me into a corner and I said, if you can't live by your principles when it's difficult, they're not your principles. You know, either you buy what's the story or you don't buy it. And you know, this phony stuff that we can run around and kill people and be good Christians just doesn't work. It's not right. Now, it doesn't mean that many of these guys will, you know, they're not going to be on the cover of Altar Boy magazine. We need to get over that. It's not about them, it's about us. You know, there are bad people in the world, and we need to recognize that. But we shouldn't make ourselves bad because of them. You know, I've talked to many a legislator who's been voting one way or the other on these kinds of things. And I say, do you know when they put a guy to death in your state, what the cause of death is? I said, well, you know, go read the death certificate. It's homicide. Is that what you want to be part of? You know, it's about us. With Vicki and me, ultimately, we didn't, I don't think, really began to understand it at the time, that our decision was in our interest. You know, Mark Twain said acid is a horrible thing. It does more damage to the vessel it's controlled in than the person it's poured on. You know, people, we were invited a number of years ago, I don't know if this is public knowledge, to a meeting with the governor of Pennsylvania, with a number of people who had lost someone in their family when he was struggling with what to do about the death penalty. And there were probably, I don't know, there may have been 15 of us around the table, 20. And there were 3 of us that opposed the death penalty, Vicki and me and one other person, and a whole bunch of people were right on the other side. And some of them had been waiting 15 and 20 and 30 years for the guy to be put to death. And they talked about how hard it was on them and what damage it had done. And we got all done and everybody was gone, but it was just us left together. And there wasn't any of this antagonistic kind of crap you see in the paper all the time now about people fighting with each other over basic principles. These folks were in pain, and we knew that they were being honest about what they wanted to do, and we were being honest about it. And you know, they were reaching out and they were saying, we wish we could be where you are. Because we have spent all these years, and it's damaged us. It's taken this horrible toll, you know. And I go back to what I said in the first part, because Troy Graves was not going to face the death penalty. He had evidence. They had evidence on him on 14 cases. They had DNA. They had fingerprints. They had everything. He knew he was going to be guilty, but because he didn't face the death penalty, he was willing to accept guilt. And instead of fighting for 15 or 20 or 30 years, we were done in 5 weeks. And you know, just it's not about them, it's about us.
And after 15 years of him being in prison, I'm working with the people in the wards and the community that helps some of the prisoners at this facility. And they let me finally ask him, could I please communicate with him? Could I write something, whatever? Took a long time, but I was finally given the permission. And if ever there was a story on what could heal you more after what we had been through, it was receiving that letter that was approved by the people in prison. And then the prisoner staff wrote something by, and they said, what this man has become now, you would never have ever believed when he first entered this prison. He was helpful to the prisoners. He was very supportive. He had changed his whole life. And I had said in there, I said, I had prayed for you every single day. And his response, I thank you for those prayers and support. I think they've had a wonderful effect. And now imagine if we had put him to death and had him executed. Just think of the difference. Thank you, God.
I don't know how many of you paid any attention when Tim McVeigh was being put to death. You remember the spectacle? There were so many people they couldn't get them in the execution arena, so they had to have it next door, show it on closed circuit TV. When the people came out afterwards, that of course the press was standing around wanting to talk to these people. They all came out. They were disappointed. He came in, he got up on his elbow, and he looked at him, and he sneered, and then he laid down, and they administered a sedative. They came out, they were mad that he sneered at them. They were mad that it was too easy. Can you imagine? The last thing he wanted to do was live in prison for 30, 40 years. Can you imagine if 25 years down the road, he woke up one day and realized what the hell he did and wrote these people and told them how sorry he was and asked for their forgiveness? Don't you think it would have been far more healing for them than they're gonna be aggravated the rest of their life? He took their loved ones and they didn't get satisfaction. This crap about closure is just bull. When somebody in your life dies, it's part of you. That doesn't close till you're gone. When they put me in a box, and then Shannon's death will be gone for me. It's not going to be gone till I'm gone.
Yeah, we're home with her.
Well,
So, I agree, Sil, and I agree with you and Vicki and just about everybody on this panel that, the Hamilton family never had closure for almost 20 years.
right.
They thought that, the prosecutor was giving them a bill of goods and they were buying it. But that's the problem.
It is.
The system does not,
Yes.
the legal system does not grant itself to get any kind of appeasement. How in the world can somebody get gratification or some sort of healing from something as the death of your daughter or the death of a little girl? It is internal, and it'll be that way forever. And the death penalty has done nothing but given us empty promises, in my opinion.
Amen.
So, Representative Ryan,
Yes, ma'am.
how do we get there from here?
First of all, what you both have done today, all three of you have done, is really the way that we need to do this, to have people hear the compelling story of it. And so I would agree with you. The comment about the issue, anyone who is without sin cast the first stone, is particularly important. In 2014, I walked across the United States to raise awareness of kids with disabilities. But initially, it was a walk of atonement and a walk of gratitude. And the walk of atonement for me personally is I'm much older than all three of you, probably combined. But in my faith,
Methuselah.
so my birth certificate is written in my native tongue, ancient Aramaic. So be careful. But what happened is that I said, it's a walk of atonement in the perspective that I asked God that if there was anyone I've ever hurt in my life, that they would forgive me. If there's anyone I've ever disappointed, that they would pray for me. And if there's any person I've ever helped, that they would help another person. And as you get older in life, you realize there's a lot more to life than vengeance, and that vengeance doesn't get you anywhere.
Right.
And so what happens in this thing, you can be bitter and different things that have happened in your life, or you cannot be. My wife and I have had 3 children that we've lost. They were either stillborn or miscarriage along the way. So we've had a total of 7 children. And our first child led me to do a fetal remains bill, which said that if you lost a child before the baby was born, that you would be given the opportunity at your discretion, at the mom's discretion, about having the baby buried. And that was not available to us. And I would tell you that when our baby was disposed of and we were told it was hazardous medical waste, it was the way it was treated. It had a deep angering effect on me.
Yeah, I
It
understand.
actually took me away from my faith for about 10 years. And I realized that at the end of that 10-year period, that didn't do anybody any good. And that I was making an even bigger mistake by the way I was reacting. And so what I would tell you in terms of bringing this together, I think the death penalty is wrong. I just absolutely believe it's wrong. I believe that we need to fund public defenders. So how do we make it happen? I need to get you both, and Kathleen with you there, in front of the House Judiciary Committee. I did ask, and I would like to be very candid. If you don't mind, people who are flamethrowers, I call that the person who thinks that they can make this an issue something other than what it is. This is an injustice that needs to be resolved. If they start putting all sorts of other ornaments on it, it will distract from the message and we'll lose.
Yeah.
And so, I don't mean to it's important that we talk candidly to make it happen. If someone were to say, we want to end the death penalty, and then someone say simultaneously, we're concerned about police brutality, I will tell you, it won't go anywhere. It's done. The issue is, it's over. We won't get anywhere.
Yeah.
You need to stay singularly focused on
Right, I agree.
What we talked about.
what we want to get done. And that doesn't mean that we think that there's not merit to the other issues to look at, but we need to focus on the issue. Kirk, your story is just incredible. And you know, I would tell you, bringing up what happened to your marriage is people need to hear that, because these are real stories. These are what happens to your family isolation. I will tell you from the research I did in trying to find out about mandatory minimums, we found out that about 50% of people in death row were falsely convicted, wrongly convicted.
Wow.
But it's bad enough if it's 5%, but when it's 50%, that ought to tell us that there's a problem. I heard from many survivors' families who said, and by survivors, I mean that you're still alive in your case, Vicki, and still that your daughter Shannon passed away so sadly, that it did not bring closure to have this picked at all the time. We had a family member who was brutally assaulted and raped.
Oh.
Caught the person, he went to prison, and every time he was up for parole, they called her, and she said it was like reliving the issue all over again.
Horrible. Horrible.
So she just said, I'd rather not know,
Mm-hmm.
because it just doesn't allow us to ever get closure. And so I'm committed to doing it. We've had, Chris Rabb and I have had a couple discussions where we've had some people who were helping us that turned out not to be so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're working on the House of Representatives side. COVID-19 certainly didn't help matters any. So we're hoping that if it doesn't, and there's unfortunately not a lot of session days left this session,
Right.
that we can get back and restore it in the next cycle. My intent would be, if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected, I would want to sit down with Chris and say, let's make it a House of Representatives bill only. Let's get it through the House first and then deal with it in the Senate afterwards. There are a couple key players in the Senate that I believe that we can make it happen with, that are on the Republican side, and I think that support would help us tremendously. And I would welcome your support in the process, because you do tell a compelling story, and I'd be honored to help facilitate it. I really would.
Thank you. We'll help you in any way we can. Thank you.
You just pick up the phone, there, Congressman. I come running.
Yeah, thank you.
The only deal is you got to call me Frank.
Yeah,
All right. Hard me to do that with my superior officer.
Ooh.
Our superior officer's name is God, is Christ.
Indeed.
Or in my case, it's Christ and then my wife.
Indeed.
She's the commanding general. If you notice, by the way, my dog heard my voice and came running up and insisted if I didn't pick her up, she was going to start barking.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be better to pick her up, and she wanted to say hello and give me a kiss.
Can she say hello? Where is she?
She did the
after
bus.
she gave me a kiss, she got back down again.
Oh, well, fine.
That's one in Boston, isn't it?
It was Boston Terrier. Her name is Abby.
Cute as they be.
Absolutely. So I just posted into the chat to see what questions people might have. So I'm waiting to see if anyone is coming up with any. You know what I wanted to ask? You converted to Catholicism and you told us a little bit about that. How did that come about? You said that there were people that had visited you?
Well, I went to the every service that they had, and and I even, I had searched everything. When I felt like God had left and forsaken me. The whole say, "Why have you forsaken me?" type of thing. And he was telling me, he says, "It's going to take me about 9 years to tell you, but I'll let you know." And so, I thought he was kidding. And of course he wasn't. But, I don't know, but I was at peace with myself. I hadn't did a damn thing wrong, and I weren't going to be, and anybody that ever asked me, I was an innocent man. That was the first thing out of my mouth. And, and I guess the squeaky wheel gets the most grease, but I certainly, never stood on it. But there was one thing that I needed to find out, and that was who killed Dawn Hamilton. And I even helped do that. So I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing to find the truth in something. Because I tell you what, I can't stand not knowing the truth about anything.
Mm-hmm.
I speak it, and I want to find it. And if somebody not telling to me the truth, I don't want to talk to them.
I like it.
And so I that's how I stand up in my life. I never miss no words about my mother was an honest woman, and they're very spiritual. Nobody. I'm the only Catholic in the family, and but I wanted to tell you that real quickly. So when I was telling you about the gas chamber, I alluded to it a little bit over top of my head. So I had took the catechism by Al Rose. And so Bishop Ricard of the Archdiocese in Baltimore at the time, he was there in Baltimore. He came in and ushered me into the church underneath the gas chamber through the bars. And he put his hand on my head, and then I was Catholic then, and I've been Catholic ever since. And I just knew it was something spiritually uplifting about that whole experience. And that's when it started to change. Unfortunately, God keeps, he doesn't necessarily take something out of your path. 5 months before I got out of prison, my mother passed away. I got a lot of things that happened to me. I lost my uncle. I lost my best friend to suicide. I lost all kinds of things trying to stand up through that life. But, for some reason, God knows better than we do.
Amen.
And I don't try to figure that out too much. I just take what I get and hope I can get through it by God's grace. And at the end of the day, it seems like that's what's happening. God says, well, here's the death penalty. We're going to send you to death row now. And then, but your mother's going to die before you get out.
Yeah.
And you're going to get liver cancer in the middle of a pandemic.
Wow.
But, it's, I still don't really, I ain't worried. And, the thing was about the size of a payday bar a few months ago, right before the pandemic started. And now it's the size of a grain of rice, they say.
Oh, thank you.
Wow.
So I got the same thing as RBG got. And
wow.
we're going to get out of this thing. It's, I know the death penalty is going to go. It's only a matter of time. And like all things, God's going to show us something before he does something. That's how that works.
She is a little better looking than you are.
Ooh. Ooh.
You think so?
Sorry, we have a couple of questions
Go
from
ahead.
some of the participants. So the first one is, how do you approach Catholics who are firmly in favor of the death penalty? And I want to hit that one to you, Rep. Ryan. You are closest to that field. You're in the house that, you're literally in the house that makes these decisions.
What I've typically done, and we have a very active Catholic group in the House of Representatives. We've had a tremendous amount of success in convincing a lot of the Catholics to be willing to examine it. And the way I usually approach it is to go back to what Sill's comment was, and there was a great verse reading today, sermon today, that Christ planted wheat, and then the enemy came in and planted weeds. And we had to sometimes let weeds grow up amongst the wheat and then harvest the wheat separately from the weeds at the end. And if someone's really devout to their faith, that argument will, generally speaking, work. But if they're not, if they are, I hate to use this expression with Catholics in name only, where they were baptized Catholic, but they're not practicing. And there's a lot more of that than you might think. That argument doesn't work. So what I've typically looked at, I see there's a second question here. I've typically appealed to the other end of it, saying that there's a significant, and as a CPA, I feel real comfortable saying this, there's a significant financial cost to the level of appeals that takes place if someone gets a death penalty that will be extraordinarily expensive. And that, generally speaking, turns me off, though, because what that says to me is if I give someone life without parole, they might still be innocent, but they're not going to get the level of appeal. So that actually causes me to question the entire validity of the system.
Mhm.
That's where I am personally. So I kind of try to look at the individual to say, what do I think is the argument that will work? What is it the argument that doesn't work? I found my personal experiences, the personal testimonies of Vicky and Sil and Kirk are very, very effective in terms of convincing people to at least be willing to look at it. There will be people on the other side, though, who've lost family members who will be equally as vocal, saying, you need the person to be put to death. And Ken, I hate to blame the media on anything, but the media doesn't do a lot of justice when people see injustice occurring and nothing's happening. It gets them angry, angry enough to not to want to cure other injustices. And so one of the comments I made down, one of the biggest problems I run into is that a lot of times people want to rush to judgment so they can close the case, whether or not it's
we know.
not.
Yeah.
And so they put the person away. So that could you imagine being someone like Sil and Vicky who lost Shannon to find out 20 years later that the person was in fact innocent if that had happened. Now in this case, you took the death penalty off the table and he agreed to plead guilty. So he was guilty. But imagine going all the way through this, Kirk, the family of the person that was accused, that had accused you, all of a sudden find yourself in a situation where after all that time, the person got away with murder.
Right.
Now they've got a double negative.
Right, absolutely. When Vicky and I were standing in the back vestibule of the church, about to follow the...
Well, we can only see the tippy top of your head. Not that it's not an attractive head, but...
Okay. When Vicky and I were about to follow Shannon's casket up the aisle at her funeral, our camera's not behaving. Two police officers approached us, and they told us that they thought that the guy that killed Shannon was in church.
Oh,
We're about to follow her casket up the aisle, and they wanted to talk to a friend of hers that she had talked to on the phone a couple of nights earlier about this guy that had followed her home from the movie. So they were at the reception after the burial, and they talked to her. They came back and they told us, we think that the guy that killed her's here.
Oh.
And when we cleaned her apartment out 2 days later, they told us, we know in our gut this is the guy. And when they finally brought him in, he failed the lie detector test. But Shannon had fought the guy. She bit him. There was blood all over the place. His blood all over the place. They had loads of DNA. So the DNA exonerated this guy. If it had not been for the DNA, I believe we would have had a relatively quick trial. And
The wrong person.
and he wasn't anywhere near being the guy that killed her.
So many of these cases, there was actually a fellow in my case that, was really eyeballed at the end of my trial and everything, thought he had done something, he might have been involved. But this guy was right underneath everybody's nose, including mine.
Yeah.
And, you just can't buy a fluke.
Yeah.
I got freedom. And, I think there's many people that were on death row that didn't make it.
Mhm, I'm sure. Yeah.
Kirk, you at Witness to Innocence have been doing some really interesting work with district attorneys. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. A&J, Accuracy and Justice Workshops, we put them on, and we did one with Larry Krasner and his group, all of his prosecutors in his office. He made it mandatory. We've been to Colorado, Washington, New York, and basically 3 panelists, almost like this, except they're death row exonerees like myself, and 1 facilitator that happens to be a lawyer. And we talk back and tell the prosecutors about the systemic troubles and what we could do, to make the system better. We don't necessarily talk about the death penalty, but I work it in there every time when I'm doing it, because I think that's the great. And Vicki and I, we used to talk about this. Vicki, you remember we used to say this stuff?
Yeah.
That the ending the death penalty was just the next criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best ones for it. And so, somebody had mentioned, I seen in a question, somebody had mentioned about money, financial. My trial cost about $3,000 a piece for 2 trials. And then we wound up having 3 trials. 2 of them weren't worth nothing. We spent over $6 million to try a guy for nothing.
Wow.
Wow.
And so, think about that. There's been 168 of us found innocent on death row, or 69 now. The number keeps climbing, and that have been found innocent. Now, do the math. I know, Frank, you're a CPA over there. You probably figured that out real quick. That's a lot of damn money. And, Pennsylvania has one of the highest death rows in the country nowadays, or the 3rd highest. Isn't it, Kathleen? Isn't that what it is?
Actually, it's been going down. We're now, I think, 5th.
Okay, well, still, that's a lot of people and a lot of money and a lot of trials. And, Harold Wilson, bless his heart, he isn't in with us anymore, but he was innocent on death row in the state of Pennsylvania. I could keep going on with names and different ones. There's 6 people been found innocent in the state of Pennsylvania on death row. And Witness to Innocence, we tell our stories, and I have lots of men and women who tell their stories the same way I do, because the bottom line is that if it can happen to me, honorably discharged Marine with no criminal record or criminal history, I wanted to be a cop, and I was an MP in the Marine Corps, and so there is nothing in my history or my life that would suggest, even remotely, other than somebody saying he looks like the guy that did it. That's how I went to prison.
Wow.
Death row. Because he looks like the guy that done it. No, we say he was 5 identification witnesses said it. And now it's more than that. It used to, I think it's up to 10 now.
Wow.
But there's a case that 10 people said, so you can't rely about that. Witness identification is 80% of the reason wrongful convictions happen. Not to imagine, we could sit here all day, custodial interrogations, poor police work, bad prosecutor. There is such a thing, and or bad lawyers on the other side.
Yep.
Sometime I'll tell you a story about my first lawyer. You guys will think it's funny, but it wasn't. All right, I'll tell you. So picture a prison visiting room, okay? My lawyer comes in off the street through an archway. There's no door there. And it's 8 foot high and 10 foot wide. And he sits with his back to a brick wall. We have to talk through that glass, And the first thing out of his mouth, Frank, he says, Kirk, you're in a lot of trouble. But don't worry, I know my way around the courtroom. And we're talking on his phone, right? And I know my way around the courtroom. We're going to find our way out of here together. We talked about the case for 20 minutes. One of only 3 visits this man came to see me in the 8 months it took to send me to death row. And right before he gets ready to leave, he reiterated what he said in the beginning. He said, Kirk, I know my way around the courtroom. We're going to find our way out of here together. Put his hand on the glass to say goodbye, picked up his briefcase, turned around, and ran right in the wall.
Inspiring.
I think.
That's a true story.
Oh my God.
He was right. I was in a lot of trouble.
Oh my.
But that's an exaggeration of a greater point. We're not capable, and we shouldn't be capable of killing our own citizens.
Amen.
We shouldn't have a sentence about it. We shouldn't talk about it. We have a law that says you can't kill and then turn around and kill them. That don't make no sense. And so, first chance we get, we got to end this thing once and for all. I was hoping the Supreme Court could bust this thing wide open, and it still might. And, if it comes to constitutionality, I wouldn't expect it to happen, but you never know. But as long as they got the death penalty, I'm going to fight it all I got.
I will too.
I will too.
So, final,
But
thank you.
never giving up. Never.
So final words from you, Representative Ryan?
I would encourage you, when you establish your battle plan, to go ahead and get this through the House and the Senate. Choose your allies carefully,
Yes.
because the wrong ally could actually prevent you from getting your mission accomplished. And a couple of names came up today that I would really like to talk to you all about offline.
Yeah.
What to do. And then what is always worthwhile to do is sit down and get together with the committee chair to outline kind of a process, and I'm happy to facilitate that meeting. Chairperson Rob Kaufman is a good guy. He's a good person. And sit down and discuss it with him. And then what you do is then you take it live to do it. A lot of times people try to do this battling with getting some high-profile people to come in and do things. And sometimes that's not the best way to get something accomplished, because we need to get this thing done. We need to write this system. And in my mind, quite candidly, fix the entire judicial system.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
How about you, Shebert? Final thoughts?
Thank you.
If we can help, we're
Here for you.
willing to help. We've worked in some other places. Some places we've been successful. Some places not so successful. We spent a lot of time in Kansas and Nebraska, and we're kind of successful in Nebraska, but that didn't work out. So, where we can help, we're more than willing to help.
I promised our daughter in heaven that I couldn't come home and see her till the state she was born in and the state she died in were off past it. States, so we have a ways to go, but we've done a whole lot. 9 states to 21, 22 almost. We are going to get there, and so I keep on living to get there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you all. This has been really a delightful conversation.
One Wonderful.
I'm sure we will see all of you again soon. And to our guests, thank you for joining us. And we will reach out with some more information and some actions that you can take.
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful job, Kathleen.
See you, Frank.
Be good, sir.
Thank you.
Vicky, take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Kathleen, always.
We're praying for you.
We are. Good luck, honey.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm praying for you all as well. Kirk, you're in my prayers.
Thank you, Frank.
God bless.
Okay. Good night.
Good
Good night.
night.